The record on Zora Shaw had been closed for 11 years. Not resolved. Closed. There is a difference, and in certain rooms that don't appear on any building directory, where expensive carpet absorbs sound before it settles, that difference is the only currency that matters. What the record showed, a financial forensics analyst, 36 years old, embedded with a Congressional Oversight Subcommittee, spring of 2013. She submitted a report naming 4 companies, 2 sitting senators, and 1 private holding group with no listed principals. The subcommittee thanked her. Suspended her access within 72 hours. The report was archived under a procedural hold with no listed expiration date. What the record did not show, what she did after. Where she went. What she kept. This is not the record. Hey, before we go further, if someone handed back the work a system decided to bury, after 11 years, and told you to keep going, what would you do with those 11 years in between? Leave it below. Because what happens next depends on your answer. Zora arrived at the Aldrin Hotel's private conference room 30 minutes early. She noted both exits before she noted anything else. Then she spread her notes across the left side of the table, 6 pages of preliminary capital flow analysis in the shorthand her first mentor had built for her when she was 24, set water to her right, uncapped her pen, and added 2 lines to page 3. The door opened at 7:04. The man who entered was not the intermediary she had arranged to meet. She knew this before he crossed the room, not from his face, which she had no file on, but from the way the 2 hotel staff visible through the glass panel each found somewhere else to be within 4 seconds of his arrival. Rooms do not reorganize themselves around intermediaries. He was Korean, late 20s or early 30s, very tall, in a suit that required no ornamentation. At the left side of his neck, above the collar, dense scalework tattoo disappeared into the fabric. He sat. He did not introduce himself. He looked at her notes the way she looked at them, by structure, not by sequence. Reading the architecture of the argument. He reached across the table. Picked up page 2 of her capital flow reconstruction. Read it for 8 seconds. Slid it back. Keep going, he said. She did not keep going. She collected the pages, squared them on the dark table surface, and looked at him directly. He was not assessing her. He had already assessed her. He was waiting for her to understand that. The record had been closed for 11 years. What the subcommittee failed to account for, closing a file is not the same as ending the work. Some people, when you remove their access, go somewhere quieter and keep building. The record calls this silence. It is patience. She asked for his name. He gave it, Co. Juno. Then, without pause, he gave her the name of the holding entity. The one with no listed principals. The one her 2013 report had named without being able to reach the person behind it. She set her pen down. He watched her process this. Not with satisfaction. With the attention of someone running a final verification on a calculation they had already committed to. Who sent you the referral? She said. He told her. The name was identical to the source who had brought her this engagement. The same source she had used 3 times before without incident. That was the first thing that was going to need a new column. She did not keep going. Not immediately. She set the pen down and let the 90 seconds after a significant discovery do their work, which is not the work of deciding, but of listening to what the silence reveals. What the silence revealed, Co. Juno was not going to add to what he had said. He had transferred the information he intended to transfer. He was waiting to see what she did with it. She had been careful for 4 years. Careful is a different architecture from cautious. Cautious avoids the rooms where dangerous things happen. Careful walks into those rooms and counts the exits before sitting down. She had taken the position at Crenshaw Meridian because the firm was small enough to know the shape of every case that came through it. She had accepted engagements where the documentation was clean because she had made that a prerequisite. She had built a professional life exactly the size of what she was willing to risk, and she had called that size reasonable, and she had called it enough. What she had never called it was finished. The secondary framework had existed since her third day on the Meridian Holdings engagement. Not strategy, reflex. The same reflex that ran 2 extra checks when the standard review produced nothing. She knew what her own work looked like when the surface was the whole story. The Meridian Holdings surface was not the whole story. "You've been inside my preliminary analysis," she said. "Since you started it," CO Juno said. "Through what access?" "The referral source arranged credentials through a channel that didn't route through your firm." He said this the way you say a thing that is true and that you did not expect would be comfortable. "A backdoor in the referral infrastructure. There is a category of transparency that is indistinguishable from strategy. You give exactly what you have decided someone needs to know, in exactly the order that produces the outcome you want, and call it honesty because nothing said was false." CO Juno was something different. He was transparent because concealment was no longer useful. "You arranged this engagement for me specifically," she said. "Yes." "Before the referral source contacted me?" "Yes." She absorbed this. 10 days of work on a framework she had believed was independent. She did not say what she was thinking. She added it to the column in her head she would transfer to the secondary framework when she was alone. "The preliminary identified something," she said. "The entry point in the contractor relationship," he said. "Column 3. She had not named column 3. She had not named columns at all. He had been inside the preliminary framework long enough to name her internal organizational structure, which meant he had seen it before she decided to keep it. He placed a folded document on the table. Not toward her, at the midpoint between them, where she could take it or not. She took it. Unfolded it. Read the first half of the first page and understood, with the specific clarity of something confirming what you were already beginning to see, that column 3 was not a gap in the analysis. It was a door. Recognition does not always arrive with ceremony. Sometimes it arrives as a document placed equidistant by someone who understood before you did what you were about to find, and who had the discipline to wait until you found it yourself. "You needed me to find it independently," she said. "So the framework would be mine." "Yes," he said. "You could have told me this at the start. I needed to see if the preliminary was as good as the 2013 report," he said. She looked at him. "It's better," he said. She picked up her pen. The secondary framework grew in the following 10 days with the density of something held under pressure and released into available space. She worked at her desk between 7 and 9 each evening, produced the official deliverable on schedule, and maintained the secondary framework in a directory designated under a client code that mapped to a closed account, a billing error, to any casual review. She had set this up 4 years ago, on her second day at the firm, for reasons she had not examined at the time because examining them would have required admitting she did not fully trust the room. She had been right. She was only now understanding how specifically. The column 3 entry point had a visible surface and a structure beneath. The surface, standard contractor-regulator relationship, filings and approvals. The structure, the sequence of those approvals relative to the sequence of the applications. She pulled every approval timestamp for consolidated Meridian projects in the corridor across a 4-year window and laid them against the application dates. 7 cases in the official record. In 7 cases, the regulatory approval was dated before the application existed. She added a third column to hold them. On the 14th day, documentation arrived from CO Juno through the secure transfer channel. 3 years of contractor personnel records cross-referenced against the regulatory pre-authorization office's staffing roster. 2 names appeared on both lists in different capacities. A financial relationship between the regulatory contact and a shell entity 3 layers from the holding group was traceable once you knew which direction to trace. She traced it in 40 minutes. Added it to column 3. The framework now had the mechanism, the entry point, and the link. What it did not have was the gap she could feel in the architecture. The way you feel a sentence is structurally unsound before you can locate the specific word that breaks it. She was looking at column 3 on a Thursday evening, desk lamp, 7:30, empty office, City sound 11 floors below doing its indifferent work, when the desk phone rang. Adiz. Calling from 2 floors down. How's the Meridian Holdings engagement going? Casual. Collegial. Nia named the engagement by its exact internal file designation. Zora held the phone. The file designation existed in one location in Crenshaw Meridian's document management system, in a folder with restricted access permissions she had set herself. Adiz's name was not on the access list. It's progressing, Zora said. On schedule. Good, Nia said. Let me know if you need anything. She hung up. Zora set the phone down. She looked at the wall to her left, the section that held nothing, and let 4 minutes do their work. Then she opened the secondary framework and added a new column. That is the particular quality of institutional exposure. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with confrontation. It arrives as a colleague asking how a project is going, and in the asking, using a designation they should not know, and the horror is that they don't know they've shown you anything at all. The exposure is complete before anyone has raised their voice. She pulled the file access logs for the Meridian Holdings directory from the document management audit trail. 3 access events she had not generated. The most recent, 2 weeks prior, 11:43 p.m., from an internal network IP address mapped to a device she did not recognize. She added this to the new column. Then she pulled the access logs for the 2 other engagements where this referral source had been involved. The same device. 3 engagements. 11 separate access events after business hours. Someone had been inside her work for 18 months. Not to steal it. To watch it. She saved the secondary framework, closed her laptop, and took the stairs. He was in her office when she arrived the next evening. Not waiting, working. He had pulled the visitor's chair to the side of the desk and was looking at the secondary framework on her second monitor, the one she had left open because she had not expected anyone to be in a room she had locked. She stopped in the doorway. You own the building, she said. Yes, he said. Not as demonstration. As relevant information. She came in. Set her bag on the credenza. Saturday. He moved the visitor's chair back to its position across the desk without being asked. You were in my access logs, she said. 22 months. Since shortly after your first referral from the source who brought you this engagement, he said. I wanted to see what you would build. You could have commissioned me directly, she said. Anything I produce is tainted by my position as an adverse party, he said. Your framework needed to arrive through a neutral channel and stand without me. If I had commissioned you, it would stand with me, which means it would not stand. 22 months. This is what patience looks like when it is not a virtue but a calculation, watching the shape of a room someone has built around themselves, learning its dimensions, waiting until asking them to step outside it would produce the answer you needed. The unsettling part is not the watching. It is that they were right about what you would do. Column 3, she said. I found the personnel overlap. The shell entity. The 7 cases. She looked at him. What am I missing? He placed a second file on the desk in front of her. Thicker than the first. She opened it. The gap she had felt was a name. One name connecting the regulatory contact to the shell entity through a property record in a jurisdiction she had not mapped. A relationship that required knowing how the approval mechanism had been used 2 years before the Meridian Holdings entity was formed. A construction project in the Southern Corridor. Pre-authorization used before the engineering inspection was complete. The building opened March 2012. November 2012, the eastern facade separated from the load-bearing structure on a Tuesday morning. 14 people inside. She read this page twice. Then she looked up. He was looking at the wall to her left. His expression had not changed. It had the quality of something held in place for a long time through will rather than through the absence of feeling. You were in that district, she said. 3 blocks from that building, he said. Past tense. No self-pity. Ending before it became a confession. I knew 2 of the 14. He said nothing further. She did not ask him to. A mirror wound does not always announce its symmetry. Sometimes it arrives as a property record in a jurisdiction you were not mapping, and two sentences delivered in the same tone used to state load-bearing facts, and what you understand is that you were not the only person in this room who had been waiting. Just the only one who didn't know it yet. She looked at the file. The complete structure was visible now: mechanism, entry point, personnel link, shell entity, property record, the name. All traceable. All documentable. All building toward the conclusion her 2013 report had approached, and had not been permitted to reach. You need an independent framework, she said. One that arrived at this structure without you. Yes, he said. And the analyst needs to have been engaged as a neutral party. Yes. I knew you were watching by the end of our first meeting, she said. By the end of the first meeting, you had already continued the framework, he said. What you knew does not change what the framework is. She sat with this. I need the full 3-year approval timeline, she said. Every pre-authorization event in the corridor. Cross-referenced against the contractor personnel records for the same window. End of day tomorrow, he said. He stood. Moved the visitor's chair back to its original position. Left. The door closed with the sound of something properly returned to its frame. She opened the secondary framework and started column 4. The documentation arrived at 5:47 p.m. the following day. Zora cleared her calendar through 9. She opened the 3-year approval timeline beside the secondary framework's column 3 analysis and began the cross-reference. 2 hours in, the 4th case not in the official record. Then the 5th. By 8:15, 11 pre-authorization events preceding their corresponding applications, for more than the official record alone contained. She added each one. The framework was nearly complete. 3 more columns. 6 days. At 8:49, the desk phone rang. Adiz. 3rd time in 2 weeks. Malik wants to see the work papers by Friday, Nia said. Malik Washington. Managing partner. The person whose name was on the referral that had brought Zora this engagement. He mentioned it this afternoon. Wanted me to pass it along. The official deliverable is on schedule, Zora said. He'll have it by end of week. He said all work papers, Nia said. Not just the deliverable. Zora looked at her second monitor. At the secondary framework. At the 11 cases in column 3 and the correlation map she had not yet finished building. I'll follow up with Malik directly, she said. The call ended. All work papers appeared in Crenshaw Meridian's engagement protocol in 2 contexts: internal quality review and compliance escalation. Managing partners did not request all work papers as standard progress checking. They requested them when someone had told them there was something in the work papers worth examining. She pulled the firm's compliance log. 12 documentation requests in the past 14 months. All 12, Terrence Brooks, compliance officer. She opened a second window. The public administrative record for the Meridian Holdings regulatory review, contact log, downloaded 3 weeks prior as background. She laid both documents side by side. Terrence Brooks had submitted a documentation request within 48 hours of every significant communication in the consortium's contact log. 12 times. 14 months. The request scope on each occasion matched the documentation categories discussed in the corresponding communication. 12 for 12. The compliance officer was not running compliance. He was running an intelligence pipeline for the consortium. Every request in 14 months' time to a contact log communication. Malik Washington's request for all work papers, routed through Adiz Thursday evening, after hours, had been initiated because someone had told the consortium the framework was nearly complete, and the consortium had told Terrence Brooks, and Terrence Brooks had gone to the managing partner, and the managing partner, who had placed the referral, had asked for everything. The second wave does not arrive while you are watching the door. It arrives through the person who already has a key. She saved the secondary framework. Opened the final column. Added the correlation map. Terrence Brooks's requests against the consortium's contact log, 14 months, dated and timestamped, source record cited in the margin for each entry. She picked up her phone. Called CO Juno. He answered on the second ring. The compliance officer is feeding documentation intelligence to the consortium's regulatory contacts, she said. 14 months of correlated timestamps. He's been escalated to the managing partner. They're looking for the secondary framework. A pause. Calibration, not surprise. Can they access it? He said. Not yet. The escalation needs formal authorization to compel work papers outside the official engagement scope. Malik has to sign off. That's a documented step. He can't bypass it without a paper trail. She looked at the framework. 11 cases. Complete. Load-bearing. But Malik is the referral source. He knows what I was brought here to find. When he formalizes the authorization, he gets everything. How long? CO Juno said. She checked the document management system. Malik Washington had been active on the system at 8:17 p.m., 32 minutes before Nia called. He's working on it tonight, she said. He picked up on the second ring. She heard the quality of the connection, not wind, not street, something enclosed and still, and understood he was not at home. The managing partner is formalizing the authorization tonight, she said. If he gets it through before morning, the compliance officer can compel production of all work papers under the engagement protocol. That includes everything in the secondary frameworks directory, because the directory exists on Crenshaw Meridian's server and the engagement protocol gives compliance function access to all server-resident materials attached to an active engagement. How much of the secondary framework is on the server? CO Juno said. The current build, she said. The correlation map. The column for analysis. A pause. Everything. Can you move it? The server logs an access event every time a file is touched. If I move or delete anything after a compulsion authorization is initiated, that action is part of the record. It looks like destruction of evidence. Then you don't move it, he said. You file first. She looked at the secondary framework on her monitor. The 11 cases. The complete column 3 structure. The 14-month correlation map naming Terrence Brooks's documentation requests against the consortium's contact log. It was ready. She had estimated 6 days for 3 remaining columns, but what was already built was sufficient. Sufficient to establish the mechanism. Sufficient to name the pattern. Sufficient to stand. I'd need an attorney to structure the filing, she said. Tonight. I have one, he said. His name is Wu Sungo. He's handled 2 regulatory enforcement referrals with similar structures. I'll send him to you in 40 minutes. Where am I meeting him? She said. Crenshaw Meridian's lobby, CO Juno said. Neutral building. Your turf. He won't come to you, he'll wait for you to come down and bring him up. She noted this. He had thought about the power geometry of the meeting before she had asked about the meeting's location. She had not told him she would feel better meeting Wu Sungo on ground she knew. He had already adjusted for it. 40 minutes, she said. She hung up. She printed the secondary framework's correlation map. She printed the column 3 analysis. She printed the 11-case pre-authorization timeline. She did not print the column 4 build, because column 4 was not complete and an incomplete analysis presented as evidence creates gaps an opposing counsel can use. She assembled the printed pages in the order a regulatory attorney would read them, mechanism first, then the pattern, then the documentation supporting each case, then the correlation map as the connective tissue. She put on her jacket. She took the stairs. That is what it looks like when 11 years of patience converts to action, not urgency, not chaos. The same methodical quality the work has always had, just pointed in a different direction. The person who kept notes in a shorthand no one else could read was always also the person who could organize those notes into a filing package in the time it takes to print 12 pages and put on a jacket. Wu Sungo was in the lobby at 8:48 p.m., 2 minutes before CO Juno's 40-minute estimate. He was in his 50s, compact, with the contained quality of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong sentence ends careers. He stood with his hands at his sides in the manner of someone who does not need to occupy space to hold it. He looked at her when she stepped off the elevator. Not assessing, confirming. He had already been briefed on who she was. She brought him to the fourth-floor conference room. She spread the printed pages across the table. She did not explain the shorthand in the margins. She said, "The column 3 entry point is on page 2. The mechanism is the relationship between the contractor's personnel roster and the pre-authorization office's staffing. The 11 cases are on pages 4 through 6. The correlation map is the last 3 pages." He looked at the pages for 19 minutes. He asked 4 questions. She answered all 4 in under 30 seconds each, which told him that the framework was as built as it looked and she was not constructing answers on the spot. "This is sufficient for a regulatory enforcement referral," he said. "The correlation map adds a secondary claim that may support a civil filing if you choose to pursue one." He set the last page down. "The compliance officer's pipeline is the complication. If the managing partner's authorization goes through before we file, they can move to exclude the framework from evidence on the basis that its independence was compromised by the engagement structure." "It wasn't," she said. "The engagement was referred through a channel the managing partner controls, but the framework was built without his knowledge of its existence until 2 weeks ago. That distinction will need to survive challenge," Wu Sungo said. "It will survive if we file first. A framework that enters the record before a compulsion order is issued cannot be excluded on the basis of a compulsion order that came later." He looked at her. "Are you ready to file tonight?" She thought about the 11 years. She thought about the timestamp on Malik Washington's system activity at 8:17 p.m. "Yes," she said. Wu Sungo picked up his phone and began to dial. The filing was structured and ready by 10:06 p.m. Wu Sungo had drafted the regulatory enforcement referral using her framework's findings as the evidentiary basis, cross-referenced against CO Juno's 2 years of contractor documentation, and prepared the submission package for the 2nd District's Administrative Review Office, whose after-hours intake system accepted electronic filings until midnight. She read the draft twice. She found 2 places where the language characterized the pre-authorization pattern in terms that went beyond what the documented cases supported. She flagged both. Wu Sungo revised both without discussion, which told her everything she needed to know about his standard for what evidence can carry. She was reading the final version at 10:29 when her phone showed a message from CO Juno. 2 words, "Stay inside." She looked at the message for 3 seconds. Then she looked at the conference room door, closed, the way she had closed it when she brought Wu Sungo up. She did not move toward it. "Something's happened," she said to Wu Sungo. He looked up from his laptop. She called CO Juno. He answered immediately. "The managing partner's authorization went through at 10:14, he said. "The compliance officer submitted the compulsion request at 10:19. It's in the system." 5 minutes. Malik Washington had signed the formal authorization and Terrence Brooks had moved on it in 5 minutes, which meant the request had been drafted before the authorization was signed. "There's something else," CO Juno said. She waited. "A notification was sent tonight to an address you haven't used professionally," he said. "Your personal address. The one on your lease." A pause. "It's from a law firm representing the consortium's primary contractor. Not threatening action, offering a settlement consultation. Which means they know you're the analyst who built the framework, they know what the framework contains, and they've chosen to approach before the filing rather than after. They had her home address. They had connected her to the secondary framework. They had moved before Malik's authorization was even processed." "How long have they known?" she said. "The notification was timestamped 6:43 p.m., CO Juno said. "Before your call to me tonight." Before her call. Which meant the consortium's contractor had identified her as the framework's author, obtained her home address, and sent a preemptive settlement offer, all while she was sitting in her office running the cross-reference on the pre-authorization timeline, believing the threat was still moving through the compliance channel. The second wave does not arrive from the direction you are watching. The first threat is institutional, traceable, documentable, the kind you can map in a correlation chart and present to an attorney. The second one is personal. It arrives at the address on your lease. It arrives before you've told anyone you're coming. Woo Sung-go had heard enough of her side of the call to understand the shape of what had happened. He was already pulling up the submission interface. "The settlement offer is actually better for us than a threat," he said, not looking up from the screen. "It means they don't want the filing to happen. Which means they believe the filing will hold." He hit a key. "We file now. Before they can escalate the approach." "File," she said. The submission went through at 10:43 p.m. She sat in the conference room for a moment after Woo Sung-go confirmed the intake acknowledgement. The printed pages were still spread across the table in the order she had assembled them. She did not gather them up. She looked at the correlation map, the last 3 pages, Terrence Brooks's 14 months of requests against the consortium's contact log, and felt the specific quality of something that has been load-bearing for a long time and has just been transferred to a structure that can hold it permanently. "What happens now?" she said. "The intake office assigns a review examiner within 5 business days," Woo Sung-go said. "The framework is in the record. The compulsion order your managing partner issued is now directed at a framework that is already public. Compelling it produces nothing they don't already have." He closed his laptop. "The settlement offer from the contractor's law firm is more interesting. We should respond." "What does responding look like?" she said. "It looks like a counterfiling," he said. "I'll prepare it tonight." He stood. He did not extend his hand. He nodded once, with the precision of someone for whom courtesy is a professional language. "Go home. Not to your apartment. Is there somewhere else?" She thought for a moment. "Yes," she said. She called Seo Juno. He answered before the first ring completed. "I need somewhere to be for the next 48 hours, she said. "Not my apartment." "I know," he said. "I'll send you an address." The address was a building 12 blocks from Crenshaw Meridian, a floor of a structure that Seo Juno apparently maintained for operational use, not residential, not a hotel, something in between, a workspace with a couch and a kitchen and a view of a street she did not recognize, which was, she thought, probably the point. She arrived at 11:41 p.m. He was already there, standing at the kitchen counter with his jacket off, reviewing something on a laptop that he closed when she came in. She set her bag on the floor near the door and stayed standing, because sitting down in a room where she had no context felt like a concession she was not ready to make. "The counterfiling," she said. "Woo Sung-go is preparing it tonight." "I know," he said. "He'll have it done by 3 a.m. He works that way." She looked at him across the kitchen counter. "You've worked with him before," she said. "On the 2019 infrastructure case in the 3rd District," he said. "Different mechanism, similar structure. That case produced a regulatory finding in 4 months. 4 months. She had been building the current framework for 6 weeks. The filing was in the record. The counterfiling would be in by morning. The consortium's settlement offer was now documented in the record as evidence of prior knowledge of the framework's existence. The compliance officer's pipeline was in the correlation map. The managing partner's formal authorization was time-stamped and public. The thread that she had found in 10 days, the thread that Seo Juno's analyst had been circling for 2 years, was now woven into a structure that would take longer to dismantle than anyone in the consortium had planned for. She came to the counter and sat on one of the stools on the other side. He poured water from a pitcher into a glass and set it in front of her, which was such an ordinary thing in such an extraordinary night that she looked at the glass for a moment before picking it up. "You knew who I was before you sat down at the Aldrin Hotel," she said. It was not a question. She had known it since Chapter 4, since the moment he described her as the author of the most accurate analysis of the holding structure that had been produced, and she had understood that this was not a compliment but a specification. She had let it sit in the secondary framework's new column for 2 weeks without naming it directly to him. She was naming it now. Yes, he said. Not because of the preliminary framework, she said. Before the engagement. Before the referral source. Since the 2013 report, he said. He set his hands flat on the counter, the same gesture she had seen in the Aldrin Hotel, not demonstrative, just load-bearing. The report named the holding structure more precisely than anything my analysts had produced at that point. I had access to every filing that touched the consortium's regulatory interests. The 2013 report was. He paused. Not from difficulty. From the discipline of someone choosing precision over emphasis. It was the right analysis. I kept it. You kept it for 11 years, she said. I kept it, he said. She looked at him. This is what a recognition fantasy looks like when it arrives in an actual room rather than in the version of it you imagined. Not warmth first, not feeling first. Precision first. He did not say she was exceptional. He did not say her work changed things. He said, it was the right analysis. And in that specific, unornamented sentence was everything the last 11 years had cost her, every careful, managed, deliberately smaller engagement, reflected back as the waste it had actually been. You arranged the referral source, she said. You set up the engagement channel. You had access to the server before I built the secondary framework. Yes, he said. All of it. You could have approached me directly, she said. 2 years ago. A year ago. Any time. I could have, he said. If I had, the framework would have been built under my direction. Tainted by my position as an adverse party. Challengeable on the basis that it was commissioned rather than independent. He looked at her. The framework needed to be yours. Built without instruction. Built because you found the entry point, not because I told you where it was. That's the only version of the framework that holds. She sat with this. The glass of water was in front of her. The kitchen was quiet. 12 blocks from the building where Terrence Brooks's compulsion order was sitting in the document management system against a framework that was already in the public record. So you waited, she said. I waited until the referral source had the right engagement to route to you, he said. Until the consortium's regulatory contacts were active enough that the framework would find them on its own. Until you had been at Crenshaw Meridian long enough that your engagement record there would support your status as an independent analyst. He paused. 22 months. The number sat in the room. You built the conditions, she said. The referral source. The server access. The engagement structure. You built the entire thing around making sure that what I produced would be unassailable. Yes, he said. She looked at the correlation map that was still folded in her jacket pocket. She had taken it from the conference room table without deciding to, the way you take the things you need to keep close. She set it on the counter between them. The 2013 report, she said. The subcommittee archived it under a procedural hold. Yes, he said. That hold is going to get lifted, she said. When the regulatory finding comes through on this framework, the 2013 report becomes part of the evidentiary record. It comes out of the archive. Yes, he said. That was also part of what I was building toward. She picked up the glass of water. Drank. 11 years. The record was closed and the work was not finished, and somewhere in those two facts was the gap that had made everything since smaller than it should have been. What she understood, sitting in a kitchen 12 blocks from the building where her framework was now in the public record, was that she had not been waiting for the record to open. She had been building toward the moment it would. The difference matters. One is patience. The other is work. She set the glass down. I need the full 3-year pre-authorization timeline extended, she said. The civil filing Wu Sungo is preparing. It's going to need the complete window. I'll have the extended documentation to you by morning, he said. She nodded. She picked up her bag. She was going to the couch, not because she had decided to stay but because the alternative was leaving a building she did not know at midnight and going to an apartment where a law firm had already demonstrated they knew her address. She stopped before she left the kitchen. "The 2011 building," she said. "The facade." He looked at her. "I'm going to make sure it's in the record," she said. "Not as a footnote. As a separate section in the civil filing. The 14 people." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has been running a calculation for 15 years and has just been told the variable they could not solve for has been accounted for. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." She went to the couch. She did not sleep for a long time. But the work in her head was not the anxious kind. It was the kind that knows exactly which column comes next. 3 a.m. Woo Sung-go sent the counter-filing confirmation. She read it on her phone. The counter-filing named the consortium's contractor directly. It documented the settlement offer, timestamped 6:43 p.m., before the managing partner's authorization, before her call to CO Juno, before the compliance officer's compulsion request. The sequence was now in the record. The contractor had known about the framework before the firm's own compliance function had formally moved on it. Which meant the information had to have come from inside Crenshaw Meridian before Terrence Brooks sent his compulsion request. Which meant the pipeline ran in both directions. She called Woo Sung-go. "The contractor knew about the framework before Brooks filed the compulsion request," she said. "Yes," he said. "The settlement offer timestamp establishes that. I included it in the counter-filing's evidentiary sequence." "Brooks didn't tell them," she said. "He was the outbound channel. He was sending information to the consortium's regulatory contacts. The contractor got it from somewhere else inside the firm." A brief pause. "That's a second pipeline," Woo Sung-go said. "Yes," she said. "That's also a second civil claim," he said. "And it broadens the evidentiary scope of the regulatory referral." "I know," she said. "I'm going to need the firm's internal communication logs for the past 14 months. You don't have access to those. I have access to the audit trail from my own engagements file directory," she said. "The 3 unauthorized access events I documented are from the same device. If that device's network credentials appear in the consortium's contact log, which is public record, I can establish the second pipeline without needing the internal logs." A pause. She heard him thinking. "Send me the access event data," he said. "Tonight." She pulled up the access log documentation on her phone. "Send it." 9 minutes. Then Woo Sung-go called back. "The device network credentials match a registered user in the consortium's administrative filing system," he said. "A name that does not appear anywhere in Crenshaw Meridian's employee directory. External access. Someone outside the firm had been inside her file directory using credentials that mapped to the consortium's administrative infrastructure." "That's not a leak," she said. "That's a plant. Someone inserted a consortium-linked credential into Crenshaw Meridian's network access system. Which means your firm's IT infrastructure was compromised before you accepted this engagement," Woo Sung-go said. "Before I accepted it," she said. "Possibly before I was referred to it." The engagement had been arranged for her. The referral source had set it up on instruction. The server had been accessed through a back door in the referral infrastructure. And now there was a third access path, an external credential inserted into the firm's network before she arrived, which meant the consortium had been positioned inside Crenshaw Meridian specifically to monitor the framework as it was built. She called CO Juno. "They were inside the firm's network before the engagement was referred to me," she said. He did not say he knew this. He said, "Yes. You knew," she said. "I suspected," he said. "I didn't have documentation until now. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because if I had told you there was a third access path, you would have moved the secondary framework immediately," he said. "Which would have generated a log event. Which would have told them the framework was further along than they knew." He had let her build inside a compromised network because moving would have been worse than staying. She sat with that. The counterfiling needs an amendment, she said. The external credential. Tonight. I'll call Woo Sung-go, he said. I already did, she said. He has the access event data. I need you to send him the consortium's administrative filing system records. The ones that show the credential registration date. A pause. Those aren't public record, he said. I know, she said. Another pause. I'll send them, he said. The amended counterfiling went through at 4:51 a.m. It named the external credential. It documented the registration date, 14 months prior, 2 weeks before Zora accepted the engagement. It established 3 access paths: the referral infrastructure backdoor, the compliance officer's outbound pipeline, and the consortium-linked credential inserted into Crenshaw Meridian's network. 3 separate mechanisms. 14 months. A coordinated infrastructure. The regulatory examiner assigned to the referral filed an emergency stay order on any compulsion proceedings at 7:08 a.m. At 9:15 a.m., Malik Washington resigned. The letter cited personal reasons. At 11:40 a.m., Terrence Brooks's employment at Crenshaw Meridian was terminated. No statement was issued. At 2:17 p.m., the consortium's contractor withdrew the settlement offer. The withdrawal was noted in the record. At 4:03 p.m., the 2nd District's Administrative Review Office upgraded the referral to a full regulatory investigation. 6 weeks later, the east-facing window had become familiar in the way that things become familiar when you have chosen them rather than settled for them. Not invisible, not taken for granted, but present in the specific way of something you notice and are glad of each time. Zora arrived at the office at 7:15 on the morning the first regulatory investigation finding was issued. She had known it was coming. Woo Sung-go had sent a heads-up at 6:48 a.m., 3 words, which was the most he had ever used for good news. But knowing the thing and reading it are different events, and she wanted to read it at her desk, in the east-facing light, before the day decided to become something else. The finding was 42 pages. She read all of them. The pre-authorization mechanism was named in full. The 11 cases were documented individually, each with the approval timestamp preceding the application date, each with the personnel record connecting the regulatory contact to the contractor's infrastructure. The 2011 building collapse appeared in Section 7 as a separate historical finding, not a footnote. A section. The facade. The timing of the pre-authorization. The 14 people. Their names, which Woo Sung-go had insisted be included, and which the examiner had agreed to include, and which were now in the public administrative record in a way that the 2011 proceeding had not permitted. She read the 14 names twice. She set the finding down on the desk surface, in the morning light that moved across it the way it did every day, and let the room be quiet for a moment. The record on Zora Shaw had been closed for 11 years. This is what reopening it looked like: 42 pages in a regulatory finding, 14 names in Section 7, and the particular quality of morning light on a desk in an office she had chosen for its east-facing window. It did not look like a victory. It looked like the truth, finally in the right place. She heard the knock at the open door and looked up. Seo Juno stood in the doorway. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, from the place on the corner of the block, the one she had been going to every morning for 6 weeks. He had clearly walked there himself. There was nothing performed in the gesture, no announcement, no ceremony, just a man who had been paying attention to where she went in the mornings and had decided today was a day to carry something back. He extended one of the cups toward her. She took it. The coffee was the right temperature, which she did not comment on, and he did not comment on either, because it was the kind of thing that is only significant if you make it significant, and neither of them were in the habit of performing significance. "You finished it," he said. "I finished it," she said. He looked at the regulatory finding on her desk. At the 42 pages in the east-facing light. "Section 7, she said. "Yes," he said. Something in the line of his shoulders released, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who had not been watching him hold that particular weight for 15 years. But she had been watching him for 6 weeks, and she was trained in the specific skill of noticing what changes in a structure when the load it was built to carry is finally transferred. "There are 4 more contractor cases in the civil filing," she said. "Wu Sungo needs the column 3 analysis extended through the full corridor window. Not just the 2nd district. All 4 states." "I know," he said. "I have the documentation ready." She nodded. She opened the secondary framework on her laptop, the real one, the one that had never stopped being built, the one that now had the regulatory finding as its first documented outcome and 4 states of corridor data as its next column. He did not sit down. He was not going to stay. There was work, and they both understood this in the particular way of 2 people who have spent 6 weeks solving the same problem at the same angle and have arrived at the shared recognition that the problem is not finished, it is simply at a different stage, and the next stage is already mapped. He was at the door when she said, "The 2013 procedural hold." He stopped. "It lifted this morning," she said. "Part of the finding. The archive is open." She heard the quality of the pause that followed, not silence exactly, but the sound of a calculation completing. "I know," he said. "I read the finding. All 42 pages." She said. "Yes," he said. She looked at the open framework on her screen. At the next column waiting. At the east-facing light moving across the desk surface the way it did every morning in this office she had chosen because it faced the right direction. "The extended documentation," she said. "End of day." "End of day," he confirmed. He left. The door stayed open, which was how she preferred it in the mornings, the sound of the building doing its ordinary work in the corridors, which was not a sound she had ever been able to take for granted and was learning now, slowly, to accept as hers. She picked up the coffee. She picked up her pen. She went to the next column. The record is open. The work continues, not because it has to, but because it was always hers to do. That is the difference between 11 years of carrying something and the morning you set it down in the right place. You don't stop. You just stop carrying it alone. If you felt that, the specific weight of a door opening that was locked for 11 years, drop it in the comments. Tell me where you were when it hit you. Whether it was the coffee or the moment she said, "I finished it." Because this channel exists for exactly that feeling, the moment a thing that was supposed to stay buried comes up into the light and stays there. If you're new here, every story on this channel is built for the viewer who cannot look away. Who needs to see the work recognized and the record corrected and the person who kept building after the door was closed finally get to open it themselves. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. The next story is going to cost you something to watch. And you're not going to be able to stop.